What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and today we're going to be looking at a modern deck that I have already gone over. For the fact that even though we haven't had any major shifts in the metagame, like as far as like bannings and things like that are concerned, this deck was one of the most popular decks at the time I went over it, and has slowly tumbled down in usage, which is kind of crazy to think. So today we're going to be going over the Crashing Footfalls deck and kind of why it's fallen out of favor compared to some of the other decks that are being played in the format. But before I really get too deep into the Crashing Footfalls deck, make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Leave a like on this video as well because it's already awesome. You know what? You're sitting here watching it. It's great, wonderful. And, you know, hitting the like button means that you hate rhinos, just like me, so I would appreciate that. But without further ado, let's get into the Crashing Footfalls deck. This one actually 7-0'd like the challenge, so um, I guess I should preface by saying I don't think the Crashing Footfalls deck is necessarily bad. I don't think that it's a deck that's so bad that you shouldn't play it. I just think that compared to the decks that are popular in the metagame currently, that there are better options in the Crashing Footfalls deck, but it still can be a fun deck to play. Um, so the point of the Crashing Footfalls deck, you get to play a card called Crashing Footfalls. Surprise, surprise. The deck is named after the namesake card. So basically, for 1 green, you can suspend it for 4, which means that at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to remove a time counter from it, and when the last one is removed, you get to cast it without paying its mana cost. Of course, its mana cost is 0, just because other suspend cards have mana cost. So that's why suspend is worded that way. So this card just creates 2 4/4 Rhinos with trample. Um, the trample is very relevant. They are super annoying to deal with coming from the Yawgmoth player. So, what exactly are you doing to play this card? Because you know that getting 2 4/4 Rhinos on turn 5 in Modern is not very good at all. So, why the heck was this deck even good? Why is playing this card good? Well, because you get to cascade into it with cards like Violent Outburst and Shardless Agent. Shardless Agent, at least to me, having its upsides over the Violent Outburst. Um, Shardless Agent just gets to essentially put 10 power into play, which means it's a 2-turn clock. With Modern, the amount of fetch lands and shock lands and things like that, it's not super relevant. But if you do come across those decks that prefer to have near painless mana bases, you can put them on a 2-turn clock as long as they're not able to actually block or anything like that. But you know what I mean. Um, the other side of it, Violent Outburst, you can cascade into it at instant speed and cast it. Cascade does not care about timing restrictions on cards, it just cares that the card is less mana cost. So even though Crashing Footfalls is a sorcery, you can cast it at instant speed if you cascade into it with Violent Outburst. Um, so that's basically the way that the deck does its thing. It's not the most powerful cascade that you can perform in Modern. Obviously, there's Living End, which puts a lot more power into play than this deck does. What this deck gains that the other Living End doesn't get is that it gets access to like some of these other like utility cards. Like instead of just playing bad creatures where like if you never hit a cascade spell, then you just never get to do your thing. This deck gets to play a game outside of getting to cascade. And it gets to do that with Bone Crusher Giant, Brazen Borrower, and Fury. Bone Crusher Giant, staple in Pioneer, uh, can deal 2 damage to any target with its adventure half of it, and then the other half is a 3-mana 4/3 that punishes your opponent for targeting it. And with some of the protection that you have, you can deal a lot of damage to your opponent. If you get to connect with this thing and then your opponent like kills it and they're successful, they spend a card and they lost 6 life, which is really important in a game like Modern, and especially with this deck too, when you just get to put a bunch of trampling power into play seemingly out of nowhere. Brazen Borrower, getting to deal with a problematic permanent, and then you get a 3/1 flyer on top of it. That can end the game really quick. People compare this card to like Vendilion Click all the time because it's a 3-mana 3/1 flyer that has flash. Um, but like this card definitely has like its benefits. I wish a card like Vendilion Click was like playable, but Brazen Borrower will do just fine as it can close out games relatively quickly. Um, especially when you obviously need it to when you're not able to actually cascade and things like that, and lets you play at instant speed, so it lets you leave up your mana and represent cards like Violent Outburst, um, and make your opponent play around that instead of playing around like the Brazen Borrower and stuff like that. Last card, Fury. Early game obviously hoses the aggro decks. You get to kill like a dork and like another creature with this thing. You 2 for 2, and anything past that is just gravy. Lets you live to like the mid to late game if you're not able to like Crashing Footfalls. Also, just let your Rhinos get in for the uninterrupted 8 damage, or 10 if you have like Shardless Agent Cascade. Just a very good card. Obviously, one of the cards that I wish did not exist in the modern format, but I don't get my way every time, so I guess Fury gets to stay for now. The rest of the spells, obviously, we know Crashing Footfalls, the namesake of the deck. 4 Force Negation to kind of push through the combo, especially like on your opponent's turn. Getting them to spend mana, you're fine with spending cards because putting a bunch of power into play is pretty good from what I hear. Prismari Command gets to pull like double duty with all these 4 abilities being very, very good. Destroy target artifact, like in the game ones, I would say is not very good, but its other 3 abilities, getting you to create a treasure token, which can sometimes give you just enough mana to be able to like interact and do certain things. Casting this for 3 mana, you make a treasure, hit a land drop. You have 5 mana, it lets you ice a land or fire something, and then leave up mana to like cascade, or Brazen Borrower, bounce something and play Brazen Borrower, things like that. There's a bunch of different 5 mana combinations you can have with this deck. So even though like the creating a treasure token doesn't seem the most appealing, it is a way to ramp and give you that burst of mana that you need on a critical turn when you try to cascade. Target player draws 2 cards, then discards 2 cards. Can filter out your hand. Like if you start flooding out on lands, you do play 25 of them. So this can kind of like, draw you hopefully 2 spells and you can ditch 2 lands. Dealing 2 damage to any target gives you a little bit of reach in the deck. Kills obviously some of the smaller creatures. Can finish off a Teferi Planeswalker, etc., so on and so forth. Obviously the possibilities and combinations of Prismari Command are, you know, not necessarily infinite. There's a math answer for it, but I don't have it currently. This card does a lot, and it'll be one of your best friends, even though it is pretty expensive compared to what the rest of the deck is trying to do. And of course, I'm saying that when everything in the deck is 3 or more. Um, Next, we have Dead Gone, Fire Ice. These are some of these split cards. Even though technically the fire half of this card and the ice half of this card and dead are all less than 3. Uh, these kind of split cards take into account both halves when it determines the full mana value. So Fire Ice, even though fire is 2 mana, ice is 2 mana, the card is technically 4 mana, even though you cannot cast both halves of the card at once. Dead Gone, same thing. 1 mana on one side, 3 mana on the other, it's considered 4. Um, with that out of the way, so like Dead Gone is just like 1 mana interaction that you get to play in this deck that you won't cascade into, killing some of the smaller creatures that could possibly make it very difficult for you to make it to the mid game with a bunch of your dumb Rhinos. Gone is basically just a red bounce spell for creatures. It can't protect like your own Shardless Agent because it is a creature you don't control. But you play this more for the dead part. Gone can come up from time to time if there's a problematic creature, or you just want to be able to push through damage, blow your opponent out during blockers, so on and so forth, and things like that. Fire Ice can just put the shields down on your opponent. Um, if they leave up 2 mana, say go, and then you ice their land, they more than likely have to let it happen, and then you're able to just Shardless Agent Cascade into your thing, and their options for trying to stop that from happening are very limited. Also, the fact that it just gets a cycle for like a card essentially once you tap a permanent is also really good. Lets you dig into your deck a little bit more. And of course, the fire half with Ragavan still being a card that kind of warps the format and makes the top decks have to either play it or answer it. This does get to answer that card pretty cleanly, deal damage to your opponent as well, or take care of like a Dragon Rage Channeler that has yet to be delirious. The mana base, There is some utility to like the mana base and things like that. We have cards like Boseiju, and of course this plays an Otawara as well. Otawara and Boseiju are cards that we are very familiar with. Otawara gets to bounce an artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker, cost less for each legendary creature, of which we have none. Boseiju, destroying artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land, and then that player getting to search for a land with a basic land type and putting onto the battlefield. Fiery Islet, Waterlogged Grove, and believe that is it. Yeah. One Islet, one Waterlogged Grove. These just turn into cards later. They fix your mana and they turn into a card later. Again, I'm going to keep referencing the 25 lands because it is a lot of lands for a modern deck that is not also playing like Primeval Titan, which that deck would be obviously playing more lands. But the point being that the fact that some of your lands do kind of like cash in for cards is really sweet. Speaking of cashing in lands for cards, you have cards like Katera Triome that cycle that essentially do the same thing. It fixes your mana, like you can fetch this on turn one, and have all three access to at least one of all three of your colors on the first turn of the game. Can be cycled later if you really need to dig. Maybe find like a cascade spell or find like a force negation to back up said cascade spell that you're planning on casting. Um, the rest of the mana base, so you have like Gemstone Cavern, which is showing all the way over here for some reason. This land is super interesting because if it is in your opening hand and you are not the starting player, you can exile a card from your hand, put it into play with a luck counter on it, and if it has a luck counter on it, it taps for a mana of any color, which can help you get ahead of your opponent and cast your 3 mana spell on your turn 3, which would be like their turn 2, or somehow the math works. But you're able to kind of get like a land ahead. It's like you go first, you put yourself down a card, and putting yourself down a card really doesn't matter in certain matchups because as long as you're able to cascade before they're able to really interact with you, you just get to go off seemingly a lot faster than they can really stop you, and they can't really get their footing once they kind of get behind you against this deck. Um, oh, caverns all the way up here too. My goodness. So we have some basic lands. I'm not really sure for the island versus snow cover island why it doesn't play two or one of the other ones. There were some cases where that matters, but at the current moment, not sure what really matters. Um, you have like steam vents, stomping ground, and a breeding pool that was over here. Um, Fixes your mana, fetchable with all your fetch lands. Wooded Foothills, Misty Rainforest, and Scalding Tarn being those said fetch lands. So the mana base, in particular, you have really good mana. Like all of your lands come into play untapped. You have some utility lands in your Islet and Waterlogged Grove, and your Otawara and your Boseiju. So really like that there. The sideboard, you play super easy, 4 cards, 4 copies of 3 of them, 3 copies of the other one. Leyline of the Void for the living in matchups that I described earlier. Obviously, some of the other graveyard decks as well. Having to play these cards because, again, if you play anything that's 2 or less, you will cascade into it and you'll be very sad because you did not hit your Rhinos, which is your whole game plan. So Leyline of the Void, if it's in your opening hand, you just get to play with it, start with it on the battlefield, and if a card goes to your opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Self-explanatory. They're just gonna cycle forever to try to like get rid of Leyline of the Void, and eventually when they do, hopefully you've put some power into play, and they're not able to actually cascade into their living end. Force of Vigor, the cleanest 2 for 2 that you're ever going to get as far as artifact and enchantment hate. With Hammer making a resurgence in the format, this is more needed than ever for the fact that like getting rid of hammers has become very important. Mystical Dispute, you're going to have some hard time against like the control decks because they're going to try to stop you from having fun and playing your Rhino, so you need Mystical Disputes. It's just 1 mana like counter spells for their counter spells essentially. Could have some utility outside of like the blue decks, but obviously Mystical Dispute is at its absolute best when you're playing against someone who is trying to get you to ask them for permission. Finally, we have Blood Moon. Blood Moon just still wins games even in 2022. Uh, really, what can I say about it? Non-basic lands or mountains put a super fast clock, and really by the time they get to deal with Blood Moon, the game's probably already over. So that is the Crashing Footfalls deck. Possibly why it is fallen out of favor. I mean, getting like Rhinos into play when everyone is when like Unholy Heat is one of the most popular cards, and other decks are starting to play like Prismatic Ending and Solitudes and things like that. Like some decks are just able to weather the storm of just like you putting like casting Crashing Footfalls twice, and the fact that they're able to deal with like one or two Rhinos and then get to a point where they can just handle the other Rhinos that are still in play. This deck is very hard to beat when you get to cast Crashing Footfalls, 3 different times. Um, but on that same note, decks are more equipped of dealing with some big dumb threats that are even bigger and dumber than the Rhinos. So the Rhinos just kind of look really bad uh, when stuff like that happens. So that's kind of like my analysis of like why the deck has gotten worse. Again, I guess I shouldn't say that. I think it's bad. If I said that it was bad, it's just not favorable to play. There is a better technical like Cascade deck. Um, you can go like all in on like the Living Index, and they've been having a lot of success lately. Another Force Negation deck, and obviously gives you some more utility because you could just wipe your opponent's board full of creatures to bring back a board full of your creatures. While the Crashing Footfalls deck, hopefully the Rhinos are able to hold off the board, but you don't get to like reset it and just kind of like flip the script on how the battlefield looks. So, um, yeah, that's my analysis of the Crashing Footfalls deck. If you play this deck or want to play this deck and you found this video helpful, or maybe you just want to call me an idiot or whatever, be sure to leave those comments, questions, concerns uh, at the bottom of this video. Really appreciate it. I love reading the comments, good, bad, positive or negative, whatever. Um, and if you made it to the end of this video, then you should definitely consider subscribing yet again, because I love putting out these videos, and I've gotten to talk to some really nice people over the last, you know, week, week to 2 weeks, just from them finding these videos and stuff. So I would definitely greatly appreciate it if you subscribe. Makes it a lot more enjoyable and a lot easier to just keep pumping out videos every week when I know there's people watching. So yeah, that's gonna do it for me this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.